My daughter called me controlling the same week she asked me to co-sign a $40,000 personal loan. I didn't say anything. I just sat there in my kitchen, holding the phone, listening to her explain why her husband's business venture was different this time, why this time it would work, why I needed to trust her the way a father is supposed to trust his daughter. I hung up and poured myself a second cup of coffee. That was 8 months ago. A lot has changed since then. Some of it I expected, most of it I didn't. My name is not important. What's important is that I am 63 years old. I spent 31 years running a small commercial roofing company in Central Ohio, and I raised 2 children mostly by myself after my wife passed from ovarian cancer. When our daughter was 11, our son was 8. I did not do it perfectly. No man does. But I showed up every single day. I packed lunches and drove to school plays and sat in the bleachers at soccer games in the November rain. I was there. That has to count for something. My daughter is 34 now. Her name is Becca. She married a man named Sal 4 years ago. Sal is the kind of man who has a lot of opinions about how other people should spend their money and very few opinions about how he should earn his own. He flips between business ideas the way other people flip TV channels. Coffee roasting startup, mobile axe throwing venue, cryptocurrency consulting, each one presented to me like it was already a sure thing, already half built, just needing a little seed capital to get to the finish line. Each one quietly abandoned about 6 months later. I said no to all of them. That is the thing they call controlling. The first time I felt the distance, it was at Thanksgiving 2 years ago. I drove 4 hours to Becca's house. I brought a smoked turkey I had been preparing for 3 days. I sat at the table and Sal spent the entire meal explaining to me why the Federal Reserve was ruining the middle class, which would have been a more interesting conversation if Sal had ever actually been in the middle class through his own effort. After dinner, I helped clear the table. I offered to stay and help with dishes. Becca said they were tired. I drove 4 hours back home alone. Then came the birthday party. My grandson Wyatt turned 5 in March of last year. I bought him a wooden workbench, the real kind, not plastic, with real small tools that actually work. I wrapped it with paper. Wyatt had picked out himself the last time I took him to the craft store. I drove to the party. When I got there, Sal met me at the door. He said Wyatt was overwhelmed and maybe it was better if I stayed outside for a few minutes. A few minutes turned into 45. I waited on their porch until Becca came out and told me gently, in that careful voice she uses when she's already decided something, that maybe big gatherings were hard for Wyatt right now, and it might be better for him if Grandpa didn't come inside. I put the gift in my truck. I drove home. I did not cry until I got to the interstate. 3 weeks after the birthday party, Becca texted me. I still have the text. I have read it probably 200 times, and I still cannot read it without feeling something hollow open up in my chest. Dad, I need you to stop inserting yourself into our family decisions. Sal feels like you don't respect our parenting choices, and honestly, I agree with him. We need space. Please don't just show up places. We'll let you know when we're ready for visits also. We're in a really tight spot financially. Sal's latest project needs a capital injection of around $40K to get to the next stage. I know this is awkward to ask, but we thought you might consider a loan or cosign. You've always said family comes first. I read that text standing in my driveway, still in my work boots, still with dust from a job site in my hair. Don't insert yourself. Don't just show up. We need space. Also, can we have $40,000? I sat down on the tailgate of my truck. I stayed there for a long time. The sun went down. The neighbors' lights came on. I watched a family of deer walk through the far end of my property, 3 of them quiet as shadows. I texted back, I love you. The answer to the money is no. I hope that space helps you find what you're looking for. She did not respond for 11 days. When she did respond, it was to tell me that I was always making everything about myself, and that my refusal to support her family showed I had never actually believed in her. I did not respond to that one at all. Here is what I did instead. I called my accountant, a man named Powell, who has handled my books for 20 years and who has the personality of a reliable smoke detector. quiet most of the time, but he goes off when something is genuinely wrong. I told Powell I wanted to restructure. I told him I wanted to set up a trust for Wyatt. He said he would put together a meeting with an estate attorney he worked with. I said, good, make it soon. I also called my son. My son and I have a different relationship than Becca and I do. He lives in Knoxville with his wife and their 2 kids. He works in industrial logistics, which is a fancy name for solving shipping problems for manufacturing companies. He is steady. He is not exciting. He is the kind of man who remembers to change the oil in his car and shows up to his kids' school events on time. I am proud of him in a way that is quieter than pride usually is. It is more like relief, like looking at a bridge you built and realizing it is still standing after 20 years of weather. I told my son what was happening. He already knew some of it. He said, Dad, I've watched this coming for a long time. He said, you did not cause this. He said, what do you need from me? I said, nothing. I just needed to hear your voice. That was true. Sometimes that is all you need. Someone on the other end of the line who is genuinely glad you called. The meeting with the attorney was on a Tuesday morning in April. His office was on the 7th floor of a building downtown, the kind of office with framed law degrees and a window that looked out over the river. He was younger than I expected. Maybe 40. He had the careful, deliberate way of speaking that you either learn in law school or are born with. His name was Aldridge. He shook my hand and poured me coffee, without asking if I wanted any, which I appreciated. I laid out what I had, the roofing company, which I had sold 4 years earlier for a figure I will not name, but which was enough to be comfortable for the rest of my life if I was careful. A paid-off house, retirement accounts, some rental property in Columbus I had held on to because Powell told me to, and Powell is usually right. What I want, I told Aldridge, is for my grandson to be taken care of regardless of what happens between me and his parents. I want the money protected. I do not want Sal to ever be able to get his hands on it, and I want to make sure that if Becca comes around, and I hope she does, I genuinely hope she does, that she is not rewarded for the years she kept Wyatt from me, but she is not punished either. I want this to be about Wyatt, not about settling scores. Aldridge looked at me for a moment over his coffee cup. Then he said, that is one of the clearer sets of instructions I have received in 20 years of doing this. We got to work. The structure we built was this, a trust in Wyatt's name. All liquid assets from the sale of the business, minus a comfortable living reserve for me, went in. The rental property would go in when I eventually sold it, or pass directly to the trust at my death, whichever came first. Wyatt could not touch the principal until he was 30. Not 18, not 21, 30. Aldridge suggested 25. I said 30 because 30 is the age at which a man has usually failed at something important and learned from it. 30 is when you stop performing adulthood and start actually doing it. There was a provision for education. Any accredited university, trade school, or apprenticeship program could be paid from the trust directly. Not through Becca, not through Sal, directly to the institution. If Wyatt wanted to learn electrical work or study engineering or become a chef, the money would be there for him without needing anyone's permission. Then Aldridge asked me about Becca. I said, what about her? He said, do you want to include anything for her in the event she reconciles with you before your death? I thought about it. I thought about the girl who used to fall asleep on the drive home from my job sites when she was small, her head against the truck window, her hair smelling of sawdust from playing in the scrap piles. I thought about her at 16, practicing her driving in the empty parking lot of a church near our house, her hands at 10 and 2, more serious than I had ever seen her. I thought about standing in the back of a church 4 years ago, watching her walk towards Sal in a dress her mother would have loved. I told Aldridge, put in a provision. If Becca and I have a genuine, sustained relationship for a minimum of 3 years before my death, meaning regular contact, visits, Wyatt having access to me, then she receives a portion, not the majority, a portion. Something that acknowledges she is my daughter, but not something that rewards the years of distance. The years of distance cost me things I cannot get back. Aldridge wrote it down. I signed the documents on a Friday afternoon in late April. The pen was heavier than I expected, or maybe I was just tired. When I walked out of that building into the afternoon, the river was bright and flat, and there were people running along the path that followed it. A man about my age was walking a golden retriever. Two kids on bikes weaved around him. It was an ordinary afternoon. Life going on. I drove home. I made a sandwich. I sat on my back porch and watched the light change. My phone was quiet. 3 weeks after I signed the trust, Becca called. Not a text, a call. She never calls. I picked up. She said, "Dad, we're in trouble." I said, "What kind of trouble?" She said Sal's project had fallen apart. They had already borrowed against their equity line to fund it, which I did not know, which meant they were now carrying debt on their house that they could not service on their combined income, which meant foreclosure was a real possibility within 6 months if something did not change. I listened. I did not interrupt. I let her tell all of it. When she was done, I said, "I'm sorry. That sounds genuinely hard." She said, "Dad, we need help." I said, "I know." She said, "Can you help us?" And this is the part that I had thought about for 3 months. I had rehearsed this conversation in my head while driving, while lying awake at 2 in the morning, while standing in my garage pretending to organize tools, when what I was really doing was preparing myself. I said, "Becca, I love you. That has not changed and will not change. But I am not going to give money to a situation that will be in the same position in 18 months if the underlying behavior doesn't change. What I will do is pay for 3 months of financial counseling for you and Sal with a certified counselor, and I will pay it directly to the counselor. No cash passes through your hands. If after 3 months the counselor tells me you are both genuinely engaging with the process and making different choices, we can talk again about what support looks like." The line was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "So your answer is no?" I said, "My answer is not no. My answer is not like this," she said. "That's just a fancy way of saying no." I said, "Maybe. But it's also the truth." She hung up. I put the phone down on the porch railing. A cardinal landed on the fence post at the far end of my yard, red as a stop sign. It sat there for a moment and then was gone. I did not hear from Becca again for 6 weeks. When she did reach out, it was a short text. It said, "The counselor's name is Watkins. We have our first appointment Thursday. I'm not doing this because I think you're right. I'm doing it because we don't have any other options." I wrote back, "That's fine. Sometimes we do the right thing for the wrong reasons and it works out anyway." She did not respond to that, but she didn't need to. Summer came slow that year. I took a road trip by myself out to the Smoky Mountains, something I had been saying I would do for a decade and kept putting off. I hiked 4 days in a row. My knees told me about it. I didn't care. There is something about being in the woods that has always reset something in me. The noise in my head gets quieter. The problems shrink down to a size I can actually see clearly. On the 3rd night, I called my son from a campsite outside Gatlinburg. The fire was going. The sky was full of stars in the way you only see when you are far enough from any city. He asked how I was. I said I was better than I had been in a long time. He said that was good to hear. He said his oldest had started Little League and was absolutely terrible at it, which apparently only made her love it more. He said his wife's garden was out of control, zucchini everywhere. They had been leaving bags of it on neighbors' porches in the dark like some kind of vegetable vigilantes. I laughed, a real laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere genuine. I told him I was proud of him. He said, "I know, Dad." I said, "I don't say it enough." He said, "You say it plenty." We talked until the fire burned down to coals. Then I crawled into my tent and slept better than I had in months. When I got back home, there was a letter in my mailbox, a real letter on actual paper in Becca's handwriting. I sat in my truck in the driveway and read it. It was 2 pages. I am not going to describe all of it. Some of it is hers, and I mean to keep it that way. But the part I will say is this. She wrote that the counseling sessions had made her look at some things she had been avoiding for a long time. She wrote that she had spent the last 4 years letting Sal's frustration with me become her own without ever asking herself whether it was actually hers. She wrote that she remembered the birthday party, watching me wait on the porch, and that she had told herself at the time I deserved it, but she had never entirely believed it. She wrote, "I don't know yet how to fix this, but I think I want to." I read that line 4 times. Then I went inside and I called my estate attorney. I told him to note in the file that Becca and I had made contact of a genuine kind. He said he would start the 3-year clock. I went out to my garage. I had a project I had been putting off, a wooden storage bench for my back porch, something to hold garden tools, simple design, nothing fancy. I had cut the lumber 2 months ago and then let it sit because I hadn't been in the right frame of mind. I was in the right frame of mind now. I put on my safety glasses. I set up my saw. I let myself think about nothing except the wood in front of me and the angle of the cut and the sound the blade made going through pine. You can build anything if you take it one cut at a time. That is not a metaphor, though it is also a metaphor. It is just true. A man can build a shelf. A man can build a bench. A man can build a business from nothing and raise 2 children alone and drive 4 hours to wait on a porch and still show up again 6 weeks later when the letter comes. That is not weakness. That is not being a pushover. That is the same thing that builds houses and bridges and relationships worth having. You show up. You use what you have. You do the next right thing. The bench took me most of a Saturday. The joints came out tight. The finish I put on it was a dark walnut stain that brought out the grain in a way I hadn't expected. When I set it on the back porch and sat down on it to test the weight, it did not give at all. I had built things for other people my whole life. Buildings that kept out the rain, roofs over strangers' heads, a business that paid other men's mortgages and put their kids through school. This bench was for me. I sat on it with a cup of coffee and watched the yard. The grass needed cutting. The garden I had been half-heartedly tending had produced a handful of tomatoes and an embarrassing amount of basil. A squirrel was doing something frantic and determined at the base of the oak tree. My phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize at first. Then I read the name she had put above her number in the contacts she had apparently re-added herself. It said Dad. The text said, "Wyatt asked about you today. He asked when he was going to see Grandpa. I told him soon. Is that okay?" I set my coffee down on the railing. I looked at the yard. The squirrel was gone. The tomatoes were red in the late afternoon light. I typed back, "That's more than okay. Tell him Grandpa has a new workbench and we need someone to help break it in." I put the phone in my pocket. There are things you lose that you never get back. That is true. There are years of birthday parties and soccer games and ordinary Tuesday evenings that are just gone. And no trust document and no counseling and no letter on real paper can give them back to you. I know that. I am not a man who pretends otherwise. But here's what I also know. A roof is not built in a day. You start with the frame. You add the decking. You lay the underlayment. Then the shingles, one row at a time, overlapping, each one protecting the one below it. It is slow work and unglamorous work, and it does not look like much until it is done. And then it keeps the rain out for 40 years. I spent my whole life in that business, and I never got tired of that moment. Standing back, looking up at a finished roof, knowing that what I built would outlast me. That families would sleep dry under it, that it would hold against whatever came. That is what I am doing now, one row at a time. I finished my coffee. I stood up from the bench I had built with my own hands on a Saturday afternoon at 63 years old. The work is not finished. It may never be finished. But it is begun again, which is the only thing that matters. And I have lived long enough to know that a thing worth building is always worth starting over.